Hello and welcome to Lore Watch, a roundtable freeform discussion about lore and your favorite media. I'm your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused folks from Blizzard Watch, and I've got a special guest today since Matt is unable to be with us. I've got Eric. Eric, tell people who you are and, well, why they should listen to you. Besides,
Hey Joe, it's
the
great to
fact
be
that
here.
you like story,
I do like the story. I've been playing World of Warcraft for decades. Always was sort of surface level interested and aware of the story going on, but just in the last couple years, started to really get into it. Started to listen to Lore Watch. I started to write for Blizzard Watch and get into some tinfoil hat theories of my own after reading you guys forever. So, haven't read all however many novels there are at this
Too
point.
many.
Doesn't haven't read them all. Haven't gone back to too many, but I did read the one before Dragonflight with the have dragon heavy, and I did read Blood Ties, trying to keep up with the story going forward to be as into it as I can.
And that's what we're going to be talking about today, friends. We're going to be talking about the Blood Ties novel. If you're listening to this, it means you probably are a Patreon subscriber and you're listening to it on the Tuesday that the long maintenance is happening for the pre-midnight patch. And I figured what better time to get that stuff out there than to do it in advance of, to get this novel in there in that exact. So spoilers will be there. This is your one warning. So if you're we're going to read the book, maybe come back later and you can hear our thoughts on it. I do highly recommend reading it. And also, as a little bit of a warning, at the end of this, we're going to be talking about how this will be a primer for some of the things coming in midnight or things that we know are coming in midnight. So there will be some minor spoilers for that as well. But without further ado, let's get started. This is the latest novel in the Warcraft series that tries to advance the story, and it is written by Christie Golden, who is an absolutely phenomenal writer. And if you've read any of her books before, you know pretty much exactly what you're going to get into. This tends to focus around the relationship between Ilaria Windrunner, our wonderful Boy Scout Turalian, and their son Erator, and the relationship that they have and its complications. One of the things that I think is really good about this novel, and one of the things that I think Christie really excels at, is that sort of interpersonal writing and basically character studies, if that makes sense. I don't know how you feel about it, Eric, but I thought that this really did focus in on not just them, but like them moving through the world and how their relationship with each other sort of intertwines with the relationship of those around them.
Yeah, I agree. It really was like exploring the relationship between the three of them because it is, awkward. Every time that they seem like they got on a good footing together, one of them would say or do something, and the other two would kind of look at each other, and they're still trying to figure out how to be a family. They've been around for a really long time. Arator was seeking them out for a while, and now that they're spending time together, they're trying to figure out like who they are and whether they can have normal relationships. And so it read a little bit like, a World of Warcraft campaign with lots of quests. Like they're going to different parts of Azeroth to accomplish different things. But in the meantime, there's a lot of exposition. There's a lot of seeing, we learn things that happened a long time ago. We see them interact with each other and develop it and kind of understand where they're coming from in a way that you don't get with like 2 or 3 quest text paragraphs.
Yeah, and the framing of it is interesting too, because it's not just them sitting down and having like a family discussion or talking about what they want, or or I went to Outland looking for you and I couldn't find you and I thought you were dead, mom and dad, and why don't you like each other anymore, and all these other crazy things. No, it was framed in the line of duty and service, which I think really fits these characters well. So the setup for the novel, it opens up with just out in Suramar, where Fellhold is. And Fellhold is a place that we've assaulted. If you've done Legion at all, you are very familiar with this. If you've done Legion Remix recently, you've probably done a few things that have led you to Fellsoul Hold. It was a demon stronghold and holdout point with a soul engine that they were using to essentially feed the invasion into the Broken Isles. Well, in uh, here, this is years have passed. The land around is starting to heal. Druids of the Cenarian Circle have been coming to Suramar to help heal the land, just as they've been doing elsewhere in the world. We've seen the effect if you've actually traveled through the game world at all, and it's repeated here. And these youths are playing essentially a prank going into Fell Soul Hold, which is, and I'm going to air quote, harmless. Uh, Shenanigans ensue. One of the kids plays it off as if it's a prank for the other ones. But we get our first sort of foreshadowing that there's something more vicious or sinister laid under the surface. These kids, thinking that they're going to get in trouble, wind up going back home and tell their parents essentially that they saw fell energy, that they saw the green light, that they definitely saw something, and that there was, that's really what happened. And then, it's not we didn't do anything. It's really what happened. This winds up making its way all the way up to First Arcanus, Thorissa and Lothamar, as they are often spending time together. And it sort of goes from there. Now, I liked this setup. It was maybe a little, from my opinion, like heavy-handed overshadowing. I don't know how you felt about it, but I did like the idea that Suramar is healing, because it's something we haven't really heard about or seen in game, or hasn't really been discussed at all since we've left the Broken Isles.
Yeah, I feel the same way, that opening on Fell Soul Hold and the kids creeping through. It's like, opening in the haunted house when the movie's about the haunted house. And it's like, okay, this isn't going to be nothing. This isn't just going to be like, these characters aren't the main characters. Like, something's going to happen. But yeah, it was cool to hear changes, these little details in the world that we don't see patch to patch or expansion to expansion, where it's been years since, the Legion was fought off, and Fell Soul Hold hasn't been the home of demons, and the druids of Cenarian Circle are working to reclaim the land. And so just the little details of, blasted rocks that actually have flowers and grasses growing on them, like the world, like you don't see that if you fly there right now in retail, but just knowing that these things happen, it's like a cool detail. It's like, oh, that's awesome that would happen, and it gives more of a idea of a living world to, all of Azeroth too.
Yeah, and I think that's really significant. And we talk about how the game world does change and update occasionally, and usually it's during major patches and expansions. And with us just being through Legion Remix, we kind of understand maybe a little bit of why this is the setup now, and why Legion Remix was the choice before moving into Midnight as you should revisit these quest lines. So from here, it moves to, from that Fellhold setup, it moves to Eretor at Light's Hope Chapel, where the Paladin Order Hall is, mending armor of one of his former knight that he was a vassal to, that he was the squire to. I cannot remember, Lord Winthrop, I believe it was, with Lord Winthrop's current essentially squire, or at least hopeful to be squire. And this kid is sitting here in awe of Eretor's hammering out and mending armor. It goes through Eretor's thought process and some of his internal dialogue about how he's dissatisfied with essentially the Silver Hand, because, like many of us as players have been sort of complaining about for a very long time, the Paladin Order is very rigid and very black and white in its way of thinking for most things. Now, yes, the Silver Hand allowed a Nathrazem to be part of the Paladin Order Hall, being redeemed in the light, Lithraxian. But other than that, they're pretty I don't want to call them fantasy racist because they're really not, but they're like they look at things like, oh, the undead are or the scourge are undead. They're not natural. Or even Turellian struggled with this, and we know this with Ilaria and her void powers, which this will come back later, where the void is evil. It's always evil. It's absolutely evil. It will consume everything. To oh wait, my betrothed is not actually consumed by void and dying. And Eretor is sort of the one who is framed here of seeing the good in everybody in every aspect of the world. But he's frustrated because he's not advancing in the Silver Hand, because he's not adhering essentially to their strict rules or doing it exactly as they feel he should. He's a rule breaker. He stretches the rules because he does, and it's something we've talked about here on the show a lot, believe that paladins at their core should be helping people. Rules be damned. And I really liked that characterization of him because he is one of the younger heroes in the same way that Lady Leandrin is. She's old, but not quite as old as some of the others as far as names we've known have existed. And Eretor being sort of that young upstart that is bringing fresh ideas and fresh perspective to something that's become stodgy, I thought was a really nice touch and characterization for him that I don't think we've seen in game yet. I believe we do see it in Midnight.
Yeah, I think that he's a good representation of almost the generational change. And like the Silver Hand is a good example of doing things the old way, and the old way of looking at, like you said, black and white. And it's not the Second War anymore. There's so much that's changed. There's so many new allies and changing ways to use powers that we've discovered. And Eretor's kind of just, making friends and helping people. I think at one point he's listening to the oath of the paladins, and he's kind of like, for some of the points he's like, yeah, not so much. And then the one about like helping people, he's like, that's what it's all about. And so he does bend the rules, but it's not even, a rogue upstart comes along and bends the rules that everybody else considers to be the rules. He's sort of just playing fast and loose because he's trying to get things done. He's trying to help people, and he almost considers himself to be, this is the way we need to do things now if we want to make a difference at all, or else we're going to get left behind. We're going to lose. These are big conflicts, and if we don't use every weapon in our arsenal, and if you think some of the things that we could use our weapons are actually, too evil to be picked up, then we're not gonna do well. So I do like that it's established kind of early on that he's a bit of a rule breaker, but he's okay with it, and he thinks in his mind that he's doing the right thing.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important part of that character, because this is something that will echo throughout the rest of the story and is very important. And from here we see that he's essentially not getting the recognition that he wants. And then Lady Leandrin shows up, and Lady Leandrin has a bond with Eretor that maybe others don't really recognize. We find later on, and I'm just going to kind of jump just a little bit ahead, we find out that Eretor actually has a home in Silvermoon City, which I don't think has ever been discussed before, which means that he's around the Blood Elves and former High Elves quite a bit, which I think is absolutely fascinating. But that is his sort of heritage, right? That was where his family served years and years and years ago, or eons ago, before everything happened, where and him sort of returning there or having a home there is significant, which means Leandrin coming up to him and talking with him is not abnormal. Like, she is a Knight of the Silver Hand, but this now indicates that they probably have more discussions and more interactions than we have seen or would have thought of. And it will also come into play, again, that mild spoiler, at the opening sequence of Midnight, because you realize that this is part of the reason why Eretor cares so much about the Blood Elves in particular. He knows them. They're his people in as much as all the elves are. So he's connected to them in a way that I don't think is really broadcast in game. And Lady Leandrin sees his frustration, calls it out. They sit and drink some sun-kissed wine. I can't remember the exact name of the sun wine. And she tells him, You can't just sit here waiting for them to give you a mission. You need to go out into the world and accomplish those deeds. I know this is something you believe in. You need to do it, and I have this exact perfect thing for you. And so we find out here that Lady Tharissa and Lothamar have reached out to the Blood Knights in particular, which they never really explained why, but I think it has to do with the fact that they are paladin elves more than anything else. And the Blood Elves and the Elves of Suramar understand each other at a level that other races generally don't. Other heritages don't really get. Maybe the orcs would be the next closest because they understand sort of that addiction to energy, that addiction to power, how crippling it can be, and then seeking redemption right there. So she goes, they're asking for us to go and investigate these reports that there's been demonic activity in Felsel Hold, but my knights, I think, would potentially be bored with this. And she says it, not that she actually thinks they're going to be bored with it, but she goes, I think you could do this on your own. I think you're more than and perfectly capable of going and scouting. And it's her way of trying to bring him out of this sort of funk he's in. And I really like this because, again, it highlights the importance of that relationship with Eretor and Leandrin and the Blood Elves, which, again, was a very nice touch.
Yeah, I think that having Leandrin kind of play this role and like see a little bit of herself in Arator is a nice touch, where Arator, being part elf doesn't fit in Stormwind, doesn't feel like he belongs in Stormwind. Being part human doesn't feel like he exactly belongs in Silvermoon. Being, not in love with the Silverhand, he's not exactly at home there either. So he doesn't he's like one of those wanderer characters who kind of bops from place to place because he never really finds a place he belongs. And you can see a little bit of that in Leandrin, from going from like being a priest to a paladin and having the all of the high elves sort of maybe look down on the way that they got their power and things like that. So I think she definitely recognized that this is just what he needed. And even though maybe she could have taken care of it or had somebody else do it, that she kind of like lined it up perfectly and said, oh, I can hand this off and have it really work out for him.
Which is good. And that again, it gives that framing, right? It gives that sort of that groundwork to build off of. From here, we shift perspectives and we go back to Suramar. And here we have a dinner, an evening, a party between old friends, new friends, frenemies, if you would. Turellian is here with Ilaria having dinner with Tharissa and Lothamar. And Ilaria and Lothamar were very close at one point in time before Lothamar joined the Horde and before Ilaria almost blew up the Sunwell with her void. And there's still tension there. There's a familiarity that they have with each other. She has fondness for the memories of their youth, but again, there's this separation. And Tharissa doesn't really seem to care about faction divides, which I think is fantastic. She's one of the newest Horde leaders to really enter into it. And she doesn't care about, I don't care that you're alliance. We are having relations, and it would be better for the world if we did this more often. And she says this line here while they're having dinner that really stuck out to me, and is something I've been screaming from the rooftops for probably years, is maybe we should have dinner more often instead of just having conversations and meeting like this to discuss strategy. And it's like, yes, thank you. Because one of the things we never see in game are the quiet moments between crisis. And those exist, and we get to experience some of them at a lower level, but these high-ranking characters, these characters that are so important to the story, that are entire leaders of a heritage or faction, they generally don't get to have their quiet moments explored or experienced. And she said the quiet part out loud, like, why don't we do this more often? Which was, I thought, a really interesting touch. I don't know how you felt about that one.
Yeah, I mean, you can only have so many quests in World of Warcraft be, have a dinner party and just listen to the characters catch up, because your character is sort of a character, but not really. So you don't get, you can pick dialogue options from a drop down and maybe they'll influence the conversation. And I really love the stay a while and listen options that we've got in the last couple expansions where, it's optional. You can fly off to do the next thing, or once the action has calmed down, you can hear, sometimes those go on for 2 or 3 minutes. It's not just a couple of extra lines, but just those extra interactions that are not, okay, well, that was good and the enemy's defeated, so see you at next crisis. To actually be able to share like who these people are with each other, is always something that you wish you could have more of in the game, but there's only so much room for it.
Yeah. Then we also get a first glimpse of something we've know has always been there, but we get to see how it simmered. And we've experienced it. If you've done the War Within, there are these moments between Ilaria and Turalyon that are fraught with tension, right? The void and light are opposing forces in a lot of ways. And they haven't really spent a whole lot of time in each other's orbit, at least in terms of the War Within, up to that point. But they have fondness for each other. They still care about each other. And we find out here that they just figured out how to like touch each other without exploding each other. Like they can hold hands without burning each other finally. But we also find out some little tiny bits of information. One, they've never married. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating because everybody who talks about the lore, everybody who talks about the story, talks about the characters, have always referred to them as husband and wife, when in truth, they've never had a marriage. They've never sanctified it. They've just been a couple. And I think that is really fascinating that it becomes a driving point for these characters that I think is also really interesting. And I'm sorry, I'm probably going to say that a lot because, again, Chrissy Golden does such good character introspection. It is phenomenal. But you get to hear all that turmoil, all that strife, and it starts with just the simple question of literally Theresa and Lotham are asking, how do you keep a marriage happy for so long? You guys have been doing it for 1,000 years. And that's when all this cascades. And I thought that was really fascinating. And then in these moments, as they're having sort of this awkward internal discussion about, putting on the brave face, they talk about, what's going on with Suramar and everything else. They start talking a little bit about the reports that they were getting as far as the fell activity. And then Eretor walks in on this dinner conversation. And we get this awkward the good family reunion. Ilaria jumps up, embraces him. Turalyon is very happy to see him, but then also kind of like is scolding him a little because he's not following protocol. And that also becomes a key point that we'll get to later. We don't have a lot of time to recount everything, so I'll kind of speed along a little unless there's anything you want to add to that.
No, I agree that they're after 1,000 years, they don't even have like a label for each other. It's not like they're always calling each other like my companion, or they just kind of settled into, yeah, we're near each other, and that's fascinating because we don't have an analog. Like we in the real world don't live for anywhere near that long, so we don't have time to settle into. Well, maybe we'll get married someday, but there's not time because we're always chasing the next thing. So it's trying to wrap your mind around hundreds of years of, hey, maybe we should get married after the next. Oh, nope. Look, more Fellhounds.
So from here, they sort of, Eretor is going to go on this mission, and he's going to go and he's going to investigate the Felsel Hold, and his parents are going to tag along with him. They wind up going into the hold. They see that the land out in the outskirts is starting to repair itself. They make note of it. They wind up going in, and they wind up digging their way through to a central location where they discover that the Soul Engine is online again. Felsel Hold, which they thought was absolutely destroyed in the invasion, the Legion invasion, is up and running again and actually has souls in it. They find a couple bodies laying in an alcove off to the side, one of which is one of the youths from earlier that had tried to carve a protection rune on his hand and failed miserably. That we then now get that payoff that, well, if he's dead, something happened, right? We get that little bit of more pushing it towards. They come back and they're going to come back and report, but then they start noticing that I believe it's here where they find the encampment not too far away. They start looking for, I believe it's paths, or they start looking for trails that lead to just basically around Felsel Hold to see where those two bodies may have come from. And they discover an encampment that has been completely, not necessarily ravaged, but there are signs of conflict here. There are overturned food or overturned tables and chairs, food that's been left to burn on fires, and not a soul to be seen. They wind up going inside. They discover uh, a large tent that was probably for a large family. They open up a chest as they hear some banging in it, thinking that it's going to be like an imp or a demon that got captured. And inside they find a night-born woman with her child. They find that Fellbats had come and scooped away all of the folks here, and then they're besieged by Fellbats shortly thereafter. Fighting ensues. There's the family drama of them all being worried for each other. One might die, the other one might die. And you see sort of another new tension building, which I don't think people have considered before. A lot of times we look at the heroes as, I don't want to say infallible, but in combat, they are monolith. Here we get a little bit more of that internal character building where, Erator is almost falling to his death, so Ilaria freaks out and figures out how to save him. Ilaria is going to potentially fall to great injury. Erator freaks out and figures out how to save her. And all of this is happening in the middle of combat where they're more worried about each other than maybe they are necessarily about the fight at hand, and it almost costs them at several different turns. Something that then Turallion scolds essentially both of them for after the combat is done, which I liked this characterization as well, because again, it takes that sort of monolithic persona and makes it human, or at least humanoid.
Yeah, at the dinner party, you get a little bit of, okay, this family's awkward because they don't know how to talk to each other or talk about big things or make small talk or anything. And then as soon as they get into combat, they're like way too concerned with what each other is doing and protecting, and Illyria like can't stop making sure that Arator is okay and like not sure if he can handle himself. So it's like a comedy of errors that just goes into another gear and switches scenes but just keeps going.
So from here they take Mavara, the last survivor, and her child back to Lady the first Arcanist and Lothamar. They report back. The first Arcanist gets her set up at her personal estate with the Dusk Watch, which is their essential city guard, their security forces, going and watching over her. Where again, the little snippets of things that don't feel right. Her baby is just, every time she's holding the child, Mavara, the child is wailing and screaming and crying and inconsolable. The minute the child goes to anybody else, perfectly calm, calms down, restful. So again, that little foreshadowing, that little bit that something's off. And then we wind up getting all these moments where now we go back to Lady, the first Arcanist, we go back to Lothamar, and we go back to Turallion, Ilaria, and Erator sitting down and talking, where now they're looking to start hunting. They want to go and find what the demon is that is, doing this. They want to track it down. What demon could possibly be reactivating Felsel Hold? So they're going to go off and do this while the first Arcanist and Lothamar are setting up forces here locally in Suramar to set up a perimeter and scour the area and keep the citizens safe, bring in refugees, and do what they can to keep everybody safe and secure. This is the vehicle for which a lot of the Erator sort of personality building comes into play, because you need to be able to hunt a demon or track it, and you need to be able to fight a demon. And while Turallion and Illyria are both accomplished fighters and hunters, this is something that is maybe a little bit outside of their normal comfort zone. It's a singular foe, or at least that's what this is presented as. And they're not used to hunting singular foes. They're used to like larger military action or, larger conflicts. Even with Illyria hunting Xalatath, while Xalatath is this one gigantic monolithic enemy, she's still hunting everything else in between and working her way up the food chain. There's not necessarily a food chain for her to work up here. But they're going to join Erator. And this is where Eritor takes him on essentially a world tour, which some interesting stops along the way. The first one is Eritor's like, well, if we're going to hunt a demon, maybe we should reach out to some friends of mine. And this is where Illyria and Turalyon go, we're really good at hunting demons. And he goes, really? Because you haven't been on Azeroth for a very long time. Things have changed, and there are other people that are very, like, thumb on the pulse of what current demonic activity on Azeroth looks like. I need you to trust me. And so they go and they talk with, well, demon hunters, because who else are you going to ask to go speak with? And I thought this was really neat too, because it was presented in such a way that he was trying to hide it from his father, knowing how his father would react, because Turalyon does not care for demon hunters. They literally consume demons and keep them inside of them at bay. This is a bad thing. He's fought enough of them that have gone off the deep end. Also, don't forget, Turalyon went toe-to-toe with Illidan, and people forget about that. And he lived to tell the tale, which not very many people get to do. So he freaks out when he finds out that they're going to go talk with the demon hunters. And then Eritor has to calm him down and talk with him and be like, yes, this is something they deal with every single day, that darkness inside of them, like Mother had to do. And like, she's got under control. I thought it was a nice sobering moment, because then you see Turalyon start to like put that bias aside a little bit and start like, oh, okay, well, wait a minute. I don't hate Illyria. Like, I was scared by her for a little while. Okay, maybe I can see where this is coming from. Maybe it's not as black and white as I thought. And this is like the first like dent in the armor, I think. And I thought it was a really nice touch.
Yeah, we get like another layer of Eritor here, because he, bends the rules and doesn't feel like he fits in. But another part of his personality and his character is that he knows people, and he's made friends everywhere he goes. And so when something comes up that they need to track a demon, he's like, yeah, I got someone for that. I have an idea. I know who we could ask, and you're not going to like it. And then he assumes that Turalyon's going to freak out, and he tells him, and then Turalyon does exactly what Eritor thinks he's going to do. And he's like, all Sam the Eagle, and he's like, is nothing sacred? How could you think of allying with these people? And Eritor's just kind of like, okay, well, gives an example. And then finally he's just kind of like, what if I told you they were my friends and I trust them? And he's like, well, all right, fine. Like, he's not happy about it, but he agrees to it. But it's the first instance of like, all right, well, it's like in the real world would say it's 2026. Get with the program. Like, come on, things aren't done the way they have been forever. The world is different, but like literally the world is different. Like, someone with a demon inside of them would not have worked with paladins maybe 20, 30 years ago in game, but there's different factions, there's evolving alliances, and Eritor does have friends who are demon hunters, like good friends. And so it's not like he's like, oh, well, it's a big risk. He's like, I absolutely know that they will help us. Let's go.
And that's exactly what they go. They're going to go see Kain Sunfury, which is the leader of the demon hunters, the Illidari, who is not the player character champion, even though technically the player character is the leader of the faction, which again, nice touch. But they go in and they're met with exactly the type of disdain you would think for a paladin, not Eritor, mind you. He's greeted warmly. Illyria is greeted warmly. Turalyon, they're a little bit cold to, because again, paladin light probably doesn't like them. They know they know there's going to be tension there. They bring them in, and there's this big bravado show from Kain Sunfury and the rest of the demon hunters, and to which you kind of find out that they're playing a prank on Turalyon, specifically Turalyon. You get this point where they're like essentially talking down to all of them except for Illyria, and like you're getting to this point where Turalyon's reaching for the light, and then Cairn like gets everybody to do like the demon hunter salute and everything else, and then starts laughing because he's like, I got you. And then you see all the tension drain from Turalyon with this familiarity, this warmth that between Eritor and Sunfury. And he's like, I was reaching for the light. He's like, oh, I know. I knew I was pushing it. I was pushing the boundary. And it's like, that too was very much a good moment with Kain Sunfury, because like he's another one that we haven't really gotten a whole lot of his personality aside from like the Legion demon hunter Order Hall or the Legion Demon Hunter Order Hall questing and starting experience. And he's another one that I would like to see more of because he's another younger leader. And it was really just fascinating. I don't know how you felt about that.
Yeah, I thought it was hilarious. Like some parts of the novel I was kind of reading, I was like, okay, this is foreshadowing for this. I did not see this coming, and so when they started to burst out laughing and whatever, and then Turellian didn't appreciate it, and all the demon hunters in Kane Sun Fury didn't care. Like they were just like, that was fun. What do you need?
So at this point, they have a conversation. They're informed of a particular artifact that one of the demon hunters has. They'll allow them to attune the energies in the demonic engine, the soul engine, to find what the demon is and figure out who it is. And they go on this side adventure to essentially discover where this demon hunter is. They wind up going to Outlands and Shatteras City, and we have another characterization moment here between Ilaria and Turellian that I think is really important. They accomplish their goals, they get the artifact that they need, but one of the interesting things is there's 2 points of tension. Because don't forget, Ilaria and Turellian went through the Dark Portal. They went to Outland. And there are 2 established bases that each of them is responsible for. You have Honor Hold and Hellfire Peninsula, which Turellian and the Sons of Lothar founded, where Eretor spent a good chunk of his time when we dealt with. And then you have Ilaria Stronghold down over near Auchindu, which I thought was very fascinating as well. And you realize that both of them have been avoiding it for 1,000 years, essentially. To them, it's been 1,000 years. And there's all these questions and doubt, in particular, at first with Ilaria, because they're going to Ilaria's stronghold first. And are these people there? She didn't want it to be named after her. Are my friends still alive? And then she gets there, and there's a very touching moment where this young elven girl, who she remembered from when she first got there, essentially grew up to be a member of the military, who grew up to be a person stationed at Ilaria's stronghold. And you have this thing like she made a lasting impact on this person so that they grew up and wanted to be a hero and do good. And it was this really nice, touching moment where for us, it was heartwarming. And for Illyria, it was grounding, because at the core of Illyria's conflict is that she feels she has to be alone. Even before she became a Void Elf, even before she became the student of Locust Walker, she's done almost everything by herself, minus the time she spent at war with Turellian. She left her family to go fight the Horde, and she did most of that essentially by herself. Her sisters stayed home. Her family stayed home. And she's spent a lot of her time solo hunting. And you get that from The War Within, where she's a very solitary person, but this is a very sobering moment for her. And I thought that was a really nice touch as well.
Yeah, first of all, the game's been going on long enough that people we encountered or the characters encountered as children are now grown up and they have their own careers and they've chosen a class. We see it with Salandria we bring around as an orphan, and now she's a blood knight. And you get someone who, ran into Illyria back when, we were playing the Warcraft games, and now she's here. And there's also a moment where Illyria asks after someone at the stronghold, and everyone's kind of like, ooh, and that person fell in combat like decades ago. And everybody assumed that she would know that. And it's kind of like that, she has to keep her distance. She can't, she has to be on the hunt. She has to be on her own. She can't even like keep updated with people that she's known, or else she won't be, always tracking. And you get those little moments, like when we get her thoughts. Sometimes her thoughts are like, as she sits there, like enjoying a drink and catching up, she wonders what Xalatath is doing because she's planning for the next thing. Like that's just Illyria. She's has to be focused on the next thing. And I thought that was another cool moment to kind of show how she's just insulated herself from being part of almost society.
And then we have another moment later on where they've accomplished their goal. They've helped with a hunt to essentially free up the Fang. The Demon Hunter has given them this artifact that'll allow them to track their quarry. and they need to go back through the dark portal. But Eretor says, "When is the last time you really stopped? We've been going for 3 days at this point. I am exhausted. We are filthy. We can. It will keep a night. A night won't make a few scant hours won't make that big of a difference. We can rest. We're going to be no good to anybody if we're out of our gourds." And so he arranges for them to essentially go to Honor Hold, and while he's doing that, they go and actually see the dark portal. And this is also another really interesting moment, because for us, the dark portal is this huge thing, and it was this huge monstrous thing. And for them, they're looking at it, and I thought it was interesting the way that it was described as this thing weathered by time, a construction of just stone slowly being broken down. And they started deconstructing it as like, yes, the hooded figures that flank either side of it have pits of fell that were meant to be, like eyes underneath the hooded. A dragon crests the top of it, trying to give you this scale. But then Trellian says something that I think is really interesting. He's like, it just seems small now. The enormity of it at the time being a gateway from an invasion both ways, from the Horde to Azeroth, and from the Azeroth pushing back the Horde, it sort of lost its menace, I think, for lack of a better term. I don't know how you would describe it.
I think, doesn't one of them throw a rock at it and like take off a nose from one of the statues on it? Like,
yeah, like a piece crumbles off after they knock it with a stone. Yeah.
Like, thinking about them charging through it decades ago and spending 1,000 years crisscrossing the universe fighting stuff, and then finding themselves back there looking up at it going, huh, man. Like, it's such a weird moment.
But it's also a good moment too, because they start reflecting on it, and they start reflecting on where they've come from and where they're headed to. And then they wind up going back to Honor Hold. They wind up going back to the end. They see their old friends. Eretor brings his friends in. There's this big touching moment between all of them. And then Alleria and Turallion get to have a quiet evening together to reflect on their journey, how they came together, and reminisce about how their relationship started, which I think is also really important, because if you've been alive and together and fighting for 1,000 years, reminding yourself of where you came from and what grounds you and what relationships matter is really important. They wind up they wind up going back to Felsel Hold. They attune this artifact to the demon's energy. They wind up tracking down the demon. They take a swing at it, essentially, realizing too late that this demon is able to mask itself as other people, and in this particular case, has masked itself as one of the Duskwatch, I believe, when this happens, before disappearing. I think it was the captain of the Dusk, before essentially escaping them. The artifact is a one-shot. Once it's located the demon and done its duty, it can never be attuned to that demonic energy again. And so now they know the name of the demon, because the demon essentially taunted them, and they're left without a means to track it. So what do? Eretor, again, has a plan. What is his plan, you might ask? Going to other allies. In this particular case, another set of people that know way too much about demons. Warlocks. They go to the Void, or I think it's the Void Scar, or is it the Fell Scar? I can't remember. Fell Scar. Dread Scar. Thank you. I can't, too many names in this dang game. But they go to the Dread Scar, and they reach out to, again, Eretor's friends, people that he's worked with. And Turallion is, again, vehemently against this idea. Warlocks are evil and all this other stuff. And at this point, Alleria has left them and gone off to hunt on her own, while they make their way through Silvermoon City and get contacts with them through Eretor in Murder Row. And they wind up going to the Dread Scar, where, again, Turallion is challenged in his perceptions, because he is met by a particular warlock. And I'll let you talk about this if you want to, but I thought this was a really fascinating interaction, because this character, I thought, was one that most people didn't realize had a connection with the Paladin Order.
Yeah, so if I recall correctly, it's Forsaken
Yep.
who has a brother in the Paladin Order who has just disowned her. Has just, if you go up and ask about her, he says like, nope, she was killed in the, you know, one of the early parts of the Warcraft story. And yeah, that's the end of it. And so, Arator has made friends with this person in Silver Moon. It's another like like they just did this. Like Arator's like, I've got a solution, but you're not gonna like it. And Terralian's like, we already did that. And so Arator's like, I got another one for you, and it goes exactly the same. And I thought, sometimes when two things happen in a story and it's the same thing, it's like, okay, well, you just did this. I thought it was great that he immediately is like, well, okay, now we have a new problem that we can't track this demon, but I do know someone who can help us that you're not going to be happy that I'm friends with, and you're not going to be happy that we go to.
Yeah.
And they go right into Silver Moon and do that. And Terralian's like, I really, really don't want to do this. Like, I already did it once. I'm not going to do it a second time. But like, Arator has to convince him, and it has to be like, do you trust me? Like, I'm friends with these people. These are my allies. They've helped me. They will help me again. I help them. Like, let's get this done. And of course, Illyria is just like, well, I should be on my own, and she's gone. Like, that's just what she does.
Yeah, and the names of the people, by the way, are Jebecca Shadowbreaker, who is part of the Council of the Black Harvest, Master Demonologist, and you can find them in the Order Hall for the Warlocks. And then the Paladin that she is related to is Lord Grayson Shadowbreaker. You can also find in Light's Hope Chapel. We find out here, too, that, and this is a sobering moment again for Terralian, Jebecca, when she was brought back from death into unlife as part of the Scourge, and then eventually broke free and became Forsaken, she went to go talk with her brother, and he just considers her dead and completely disowned her. And this sort of breaks Terralian a little bit. He's like, he even apologizes to her that, I'm sorry that you had to go through that or feel that. And little by little, you're seeing Terralian's perspective start to like chip away, which I think is really fascinating. And so
Yeah,
they
it's
go ahead.
interesting because if it wasn't with Arator, he might not have had that chipping away happen. But Arator is definitely like having an effect on his armor. Arator is definitely trying to get him to come along to like the modern way of thinking and things like that. So if you had just walked up to Terralian at Light's Hope and given him the story, he might have scoffed, or he might not have been as receptive. But he has to kind of question his own beliefs and his worldview, being like following Arator around and seeing how he interacts with people.
Yeah, and we're going to move a little bit quickly here because we're running out of time, and I want to kind of get to the crescendo because the crescendo happens shortly hereafter. So the Council of the Black Harvest agrees to help, and Jebecca and them begin a summoning ritual to summon this demon after discovering everything they can about him or them, which is that they are a silent portion of any big, large-scale invasion where they show up, do their work in the shadows, corrupt people of high import in areas to essentially promise them power in order to get them to betray their own people, set up soul engines, and bring the Legion in that way. And so they now know what essentially the goal is of this demon, which is a large-scale invasion, and they try to summon it and bind it so that they can discover even more of its plan. In this moment, we get this large-scale encounter, all these demons flooding through, and Terralian loses control in the light. His fear, his idea of being abandoned by his wife, or pseudo-wife, and having this sort of contentious relationship with his son right now, and wanting to keep his son safe, because we find out here that Arator is the target. Arator's always been the target of this demon from the very beginning. He loses it. He just completely envelops, like he calls the light into him, gives himself completely over to the light. The light destroys this demon, and then he almost destroys all the other warlocks, because again, that paladin mentality, that deep-seated mistrust of all these things. And I thought it was an interesting point, because one of the things we talk about here on the show is that the light doesn't have a will of its own. I don't know that that's necessarily true anymore. And I've been positing for a while that the light has a little bit of an agenda. It is not just a purely neutral cosmic force. And I think we see that here a little. We see this, uh, complete loss of control and this willingness to use the light to use essentially Turallion as a vessel to scourge or scour anything that it seems as unclean. I think is the term that he used when he was completely consumed by the light uh, from this world. And it takes Ilaria showing up and basically dodging through a portal to save their Erator from their ridiculous peril and then talk Turallion down. They think that their mission is successful. They wind up going back to Suramar. They go ahead and give their report back. And then it turns into a wedding scene, which is an interesting transition. Again, I'm skipping over some bits here where Turallion and Ilaria is like, let's get married. Let's just do it. And Erator is going to be the master of ceremonies. They get everything planned. Ilaria, Varisa shows up to Ilaria. A bunch of their old friends. Khadgar shows up to be the best man for Turallion, which of course he does. Sons of Lothar. The other remaining Sons of Lothar essentially show up, which is absolutely great to see them still alive and kicking from where they are. And then, as everything must, a chaotic thing breaks out as a demonic invasion pops off in the middle of this wedding because they didn't actually kill the demon. He's still alive. And they need to go in and get him and kill him, which I think it was such we knew it was going to happen, but it was just really funny to see it happen.
Yeah, I never try to do too much like metagaming when I'm reading a novel to
It's
think
hard.
like, okay, now we're in the exposition and I'm just reading this. They're finally getting married and they're gonna, have this, and then there's gonna be a chapter about like what maybe they're parting ways. And I'm looking and I'm like, I don't know, I'm only like 78% of the way through this book. I think that something else is gonna happen. And then it does. And it just goes all to chaos. Of course the demon wasn't destroyed, and of course he's targeting them, and of course the gathering of all these important people is too much of a target to resist for him, and so yeah, things go off the rails.
So they repel this particular part of the invasion. The guests wind up being safe, and this is where we get the scene of this demon transforming into the various different people. He shows himself as the Duskwatch captain. He shows himself as Movara. And like all the pieces, this is your payoff for confirmation of everything that's happened up to this point. They wind up going on the hunt. They're not in their armor at this point, and they start. Ilaria bamps forward because Erator winds up getting taken. Turallion is charging forward with her. They're going to Fell Soul Hold. They get their son back and destroy the Soul Engine and kill this demon once and for all. They get there. Ilaria freaks out because they see a bunch of demonic bodies strewn around the battlefield outside of Fell Soul Hold. Ilaria is like, oh, Erator did this. Erator absolutely did this, and bamps off, leaving Turallion behind as he starts moving forward or charging forward, only to be greeted by Erator, who then they have a discussion about how their mother bamfed off again, and or his mother bamfed off again, and they have to go get her because she's just going right into a trap. And then other things ensue where each of them has been separated, which is part of the demonic plan, where you find out that this Erator is not actually Erator, but it happens to be the male succubi. I can't remember what the name of it is off the top of my head. Had taken on his form and is trying to bait Turallion. Then you see Ilaria, who finds Erator being shackled to the top of the cavern where the Soul Engine is, only to find out that it is not the Erator, but it is the demon in disguise, the one that they've been hunting. And then Erator wakes up in the where they're holding all of the prisoners that they've captured and have been feeding one by one to the Soul Engine. They break out. The big fight ensues. There's this moment where all the family's fighting, and this is one of the things that I thought was interesting. Ilaria and Turallion are so incensed at this point that they're not fighting in concert anymore. They're unleashing all of their power, but what happens when void and light meet? They cancel each other out and make each other weaker. And Erator in this moment realizes it because his father's words that he's been scolding him and lecturing him this entire trip comes flooding back to him, and he realizes that his parents are essentially not moving in concert, making their effects weaker because each of their abilities on their own would be laying this demon to death's door. And then he eventually just calls the light upon himself, draws it all in, and sort of explodes this demon into nothingness. We get the calm down, we get the aftermath, we get the debriefing that happens after, and then we get the family discussion immediately after this, where Eritor tells his parents to figure this out because he's going crazy trying to figure out what's going on, and that we have this big emotional moment where Ilaria looks at herself, looks at how disheveled she is, and winds up essentially not breaking up with Trallian, but is like, I can't do this right now. I need to go, because emotions are not something Ilaria is good at. Hunting, yes. Fighting a war, yes. Being a ranger general, yes. Dealing with emotions other than a love for her son, not so much. She gives Trallian back this ring after Trallian says that he knows what he wants. He wants to be with her forever, that they'll figure out what's happening between the light and the void between them, and they'll make it work just like they did that. They can be a family. They can be the parents that Eritor needs. Trallian at this point has completely shifted his perspective on things. And in a lot of ways, we get sort of an idea of what Eritor's title is meant to mean, why the light gave him that title of Redeemer, because in this moment we start to see the redemption of Trallian, only to be broken as Ilaria leaves, completely shattering him, which I think is part of that redemption arc, because it allows him to actually feel for the first time in 1,000 years what really is inside of him, instead of masking it and dancing around it and pretending everything is okay. He has to deal with it now. He has to deal with the fact that the world is not like he views it, that the people that he thought are evil are not necessarily evil, that they're not the end of things for him, and that, maybe it is time for his perspective on life to change. And I thought this was a incredibly powerful moment for this character. And I thought it was really good to highlight a lot of the internal struggle that Ilaria is still going through, not because of the void, but because of her own inner despair that essentially she's been dealing with since Lyrith died.
Yeah, I think that the ring itself is a good, it was really well done. The ring that Terralion gives Illyria is a dark stone with diamonds around it. Like how he protects her, how he encircles her with light. And when she gives it back to him, she's kind of like, I can't be trapped by this. This isn't gonna work for me. So I thought that was a nice detail. But yeah, it was an outcome that I wasn't really expecting. Like when the wedding was happening, I was like, okay, this makes sense that if they introduce that they haven't been married, that they'll get married by the end. And then, things go off the rails, but then they have to figure it out. And Arator's like, let's go. Are you going to be with each other or not? I was surprised that she walked away.
Me too, but also it kind of makes sense with what we know is coming in Midnight. And we before we get into that, because we only have a few minutes left, the end of it is essentially we get our Alderaan scene. If you're a Star Wars fan, we get the resistance. We get the hope essentially moment where or not Alderaan, excuse me. We get that moment where like they're receiving their medals, and in this case, Eritor is receiving his highest honor, the Golden Thorn, for stopping an invasion, for opening up the Order's eyes a little bit. It's even mentioned in the speech of making allies, unlikely allies or uncommon allies, in showing sort of that strength of working together, that cooperativeness, that healing moment. And again, you start to see that maybe Eritor being the Redeemer is partially redeeming the Silver Hand and returning it to what it should have been. Because again, the founder of the Silver Hand was Alonzus Fowl. Alonzus Fowl is now a Forsaken priest. He's been raised from the dead. So how could the founder of the Silver Hand be considered an enemy? And it's forcing them to sort of reevaluate some of, and this sets up a lot of the stuff in Midnight that we know is coming. One of which, and again, this is a big spoiler maybe, is that at some point in time, we need to punch Ilaria. She loses herself to the void. She's consumed by despair. She is lashing out, and the outcome of that we're not going to talk about because we don't know what the story outcome of that is. But it makes sense because in this moment, as she leaves, she's by herself. She's alone. She feels isolated, even though it's a choice she's making in this moment. She thinks she's doing the right thing, but that despair is what allows that consumption of the void to sort of happen. And I think that's a really interesting setup for that. And it's an interesting setup for a theme. Like, this whole book is a setup for the themes of midnight. The opening sequence where you're chasing Xalatath and fighting off the void invasion to keep the Sunwell safe. The interaction between Turalyon and Eretor, you can see here in this moment that Turalyon still has growing to do because he's more concerned about fighting the void than he is about necessarily saving civilians. And he's scolding Eretor still in this moment when Eretor is running off to save the civilians and doing what he needs to do. And so he's not completely shifted yet, but he's getting there. And it sets up the despair of Valeria and why she would be consumed by void, why she would fall to void. And it sets up, again, the importance, because we know we're going to Windrunner Spire at some point, and why some of that stuff is going to be playing into this, right? It's interesting. It's an interesting setup. And the best bits about it were the interactions. And I will say this, I love Christy Golden, but I didn't really care for the battle scenes. They were great and detailed, but they weren't as important. They weren't as awe-inspiring and consuming, and they weren't really what was setting everything up. It's the moments after and the moments before that were doing all of that heavy lifting and really setting up the story of Midnight for some very interesting turns.
Yeah, we know that romping around with Eretor is not just like a quest chain in one of the zones. That's like a whole chapter of the campaign. Like we go to the different zones, but then our time with Eretor is going to be important. And I feel like I have a much richer picture of him not being too much in the game and you're not getting too much of his backstory. I feel like this really fills it in. So I'm really glad that I read this novel. And the same with Illyria, knowing that she's going to have struggles to control her relationship with Void, which, you know, is not surprising given that she's been close to that line for a long time. This fills in a lot of like exactly what's going through her mind to make her maybe less stable than she could be.
Yeah, and I think also some of the interesting things is it sets up a little bit of the severity of the light as well, because they re-talk about the Zera stuff. They re-talk about being light forged and how the idea of Turalyon losing that control and becoming like this scourging power, this scouring power on the face of Azeroth, because we know we're going to be fighting members of the Army of Light at some point. We know that we're going to be fighting Lithraxian, trying to keep him from destroying Nexus Point Zenith. We know that there's a place called the Blinding Veil, where there is the Light Blossom Trinity, Iku's the Light Hunter, Light Warden Ruia, where it is we're going to be facing the void and the light here. We are essentially beating both of these things, whether to protect the other or to protect itself from the other, because again, it's this delicate balance between these cosmic forces. And with us, and we know that we're going to be fighting a void consumed Naru at some point as well. We're going to be punching Lura, if I remember correctly.
I think that's right. I can't wait for the cosmology reveals and what we find out at midnight, because, you know, we're in a trilogy that ends with the Last Titan. We've got to find out how a lot of the universe works and the forces and things like that. And I have to say, when Turalyon had the light take the wheel and just called and was like, light, do whatever, like, you need to save Arathor, do whatever you want, I really thought that was a paladin cooldown. I thought that I play a paladin a little bit, but I didn't know all the cooldown. I thought that was like, in the novel is going to appear one of the offensive cooldowns, maybe from a spec that I don't play that much. And it was not. It was something completely different that we haven't seen. And the light took over and annihilated the demon and then didn't give up control and identified other threats. And like you were saying, like, we think of these cosmic forces as being forces, but the light has an agenda. The light wants something. The light wanted to continue to destroy things that it identified as bad, meaning the other warlocks that were there. And so does that mean all the cosmic forces have an agenda? Is the light different? Like, what are we going to find out about that going forward? And how is that going to affect all of their relationships with it? I feel like Turallion started off this novel with thinking of the light almost like a religion. Like, we do what the light wants us, we draw on it, we do these things, and then Arator is using it more like a tool. Like, this is a force that we can use it for our own things, we can, skirt the rules a little bit. And Arator's kind of and Turallion's kind of coming around to that. And does that mean that we'll find out more about like exactly what these things are, what the Naru are, what the balance is? Like, are we going to find things out that make us do these actions that we know and fight off the army of the light and stuff like that? Like, I can't wait to find out what we find out.
Yeah, things are getting more complicated, but also a lot of stuff is being revealed, and I think that is absolutely fascinating. But I think we're going to call it there, friends. I do want to remind you that Blizzard Watch is made possible due to generous contributions at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support means that this podcast lighting community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to the podcast, a better chance at having your question answered on our podcast for the queue, and an ads-free site experience. If you are interested in reading these books, we do have a comprehensive list of the chronological order in which to read them, or at least as best as we can get it on the website. Please be sure to go and peruse them, and you can get your order in. It's not strictly necessary, but it is useful if you're looking to catch up. And if you have questions for this or any of our podcasts, or if you have questions about the book or anything like that, please be sure to send those into podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Specify the show that it is for in the subject line, as well as any special pronunciation of your name. And if you want to heads up on Discord, we have the Q and Podcast Questions channel. Same rules apply. You can send them there. If you are a Patreon subscriber, as a way of saying thank you for helping us keep the lights on, we have the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel, which we tend to look there first. And yeah, just send us some questions. Rattle our brains, please. Go ahead and do so. But I think we're called there. I do want to thank you, Eric, for joining me on this journey and filling in on such short notice. I would love to do another one of these with you as well, because I think we're going to get some questions about this book from our friends at home. Right, friends at home. And I'd love to have you on for that as well. But thank you very much for joining me today, my friend.
Yeah, no problem. It was fun.
And thank you all at home. We'll see you next week.